You're trudging through a rain-soaked field in 1347, boots caked in mud, armor rusting faster than your patience, and your stomach growling like a distant war horn. You're a soldier in a medieval army, probably cursing the day you thought enlisting was better than mucking out stables. Arrows whiz through the air, the enemy's on some nearby hill, and the only thing keeping you going is the faint hope of whatever the camp cook might cobble together tonight. Medieval warfare was exhausting chaos, and feeding an army was a battle in itself. No refrigerators, no supermarkets, no delivery apps. Armies relied on foods that could survive weeks of travel, muddy camps, and the occasional pillaging. These dishes, born of necessity and a lot of improvisation, were tough, practical, and surprisingly enduring. Many are still edible today, either in their original form or as ancestors of modern recipes. So, lace up your metaphorical boots, dodge the catapult fire, and step into the smoky, gritty world of medieval camps to discover the foods that kept armies marching, and how you can recreate them today without risking dysentery or a lance to the chest. Feeding a medieval army was like walking a logistical tightrope. You had thousands of hungry mouths, limited supplies, and no way to keep food fresh beyond salting, drying, or praying it didn't turn green. Armies relied on a mix of pre-packed rations, foraged goods, and whatever they could borrow from nearby villages. Sorry, local peasants. The goal was to keep food portable, durable, and, ideally, not a health hazard after weeks in a sack. These constraints shaped a cuisine that was practical, calorie-dense, and occasionally even edible. Let's dive into the staples of the medieval soldier's diet and see how they've managed to survive into the modern era. Bread was the cornerstone of any military supply, but forget today's fluffy, Instagram-worthy loaves. This was trench bread, a dense, rock-hard slab made from rye, barley, or whatever grains were available. Baked in portable ovens or on hot stones, it was cheap, filling, and versatile. You could eat it, use it as a plate, or chuck it at the enemy in a pinch. The recipe was simple: flour, water, a pinch of salt, and maybe yeast if the baker wasn't skimping. After a few weeks, it was so hard you'd need to soak it in broth or beer to avoid cracking a tooth. Its durability made it a lifesaver on long marches, with soldiers carrying loaves like modern troops carry MREs. You can recreate this bread today with minimal effort. Mix rye or whole wheat flour with water and salt, knead a dense dough, and bake it low and slow for a chewy, crusty texture. It won't win any bakery contests, but it'll last longer than your Wi-Fi during a storm. Look for modern peasant breads or dense rye loaves in rural Europe, where old baking traditions linger. Slather on some butter or soak it in soup, and you're eating like a medieval soldier, minus the mud and constant fear of death. Pottage was the medieval army's one-pot miracle, a thick stew that could be made with whatever was on hand. Think of it as the ultimate clean-out-the-pantry dish. Barley, oats, peas, turnips, leeks, or wild herbs went into the cauldron, along with a scrap of meat if the army had raided a village or slaughtered an exhausted ox. Cooked over a campfire, pottage was scalable. You could feed a dozen or 100 from the same pot. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot, filling, and could be stretched by adding water or any edible herbs the cook could find. To make pottage today, grab barley or lentils, add root vegetables like carrots or parsnips, and season with thyme or parsley. Simmer it into a comforting mush, and you've got a dish not far from a medieval campaign. Modern lentil soups, vegetable stews, or even Italian minestrone owe much to pottage's flexible spirit. It's the kind of food that feels like a warm hug, assuming your idea of a hug involves a lot of barley. Preserved meats were essential for armies on the move. Fresh meat spoiled fast, and livestock wasn't ideal for long treks. Instead, soldiers relied on salted pork, dried beef, or smoked sausages. These were the protein bars of the Middle Ages. Compact, calorie-packed, and able to last months without turning into a science experiment. Salted pork, sometimes called bacon in old records, though not today's crispy strips, was a favorite. Cured with salt and herbs, it was stored in barrels or wrapped in cloth. Soldiers sliced off chunks to chew on the march or tossed them into pottage for flavor. Dried fish, like cod or herring, was also common, especially for coastal armies. You can mimic these meats today with some effort. Cure a pork shoulder with salt and spices for a few weeks, and you've got a medieval-style ration. Or buy beef jerky or smoked salmon at the store. Both are direct descendants of these preserved proteins. Charcuterie boards, with their array of cured meats, are a refined version of what soldiers dreamed of in lean times. Just don't expect the same vibe eating them on your couch instead of a battlefield. Hard cheese was another unsung hero of the medieval diet. Made from cow or goat milk, these dense, salty cheeses were perfect for campaigns. They didn't spoil quickly, provided fats and proteins, and could be carried in a pack without becoming a biohazard. Some were so hard they needed soaking in water or wine to eat, more to save your teeth than for taste. Soldiers cut chunks to eat with bread or crumbled them into pottage for a morale boost. Cheese was a small luxury that made even the grimmest meal feel like a feast. Modern hard cheeses like aged Gouda, Pecorino, or sharp cheddar are close cousins to these medieval wheels. If you're feeling adventurous, try making a farmer's cheese with milk and rennet, though it takes patience. Next time you grate Parmesan over your pasta, picture a soldier slicing a similar chunk with his dagger, probably while grumbling about the lack of beer. Cheese's durability and versatility have kept it relevant, whether in a castle or a condo. Speaking of beer, beer was the lifeblood of medieval armies, and not just because it helped forget the misery. Water was risky. Rivers and wells near camps could be contaminated, especially with thousands of unwashed soldiers around. Beer, brewed from barley or oats, was safer thanks to the boiling process and provided calories and hydration. It was weaker than modern beer, more like a slightly alcoholic porridge than a craft IPA. Soldiers carried skins or small barrels, and camps often had brewers who could whip up a batch using local water and whatever grains were available. Wine was rarer, reserved for officers or armies in wine regions, but it served the same purpose when available. You can brew a medieval-style beer with malted barley, water, yeast, and herbs. No hops, which weren't common until later. The result is a cloudy, slightly sour drink. More food than refreshment. Look for modern Grut beers to taste this history, or use a homebrewing kit for authenticity. If you've ever tried a farmhouse ale or something close to kombucha, you're not far from what kept medieval soldiers going. Just don't expect it to pair well with your kale smoothie. Dried fruits, like apples, pears, or figs, were a sweet relief in the medieval diet. Lightweight and long-lasting, they were perfect for soldiers on the march. In southern Europe or during the Crusades, armies might have access to dates or raisins, which were like natural candy for their sugar content and portability. Soldiers ate them as snacks or mixed them into pottage for a touch of sweetness. Honey, when available, was used to preserve fruit or as a spread, though it was more common among officers than rank-and-file soldiers. These treats were a lifeline during sieges, when fresh food was a distant memory. You can stock your pantry with dried fruits today, no foraging required. Dehydrate your own apples or buy raisins, and you're eating like a medieval soldier. Modern trail mixes, with their blend of fruits and nuts, are a direct nod to these provisions. For an authentic throwback, mix dried apricots with a chunk of hard cheese and a swig of beer. Suddenly, you're halfway to a 14th century campaign, minus the fleas and chainmail chafing. Oats were a favorite in Northern Europe, especially in places like Scotland or Scandinavia. Soldiers carried sacks of oats to make porridge, a quick meal that only needed water and fire. Bland but filling, porridge could be livened up with foraged herbs or dried fruit. In Scotland, oats were mixed with water and baked into flat cakes called bannocks, the Highlands' answer to energy bars. These cakes were portable, durable, and eaten on the move or during battle breaks. Their simplicity made them a staple for warriors well into later centuries. To make porridge, boil oats with water or milk and add whatever you have, berries, nuts, or a drizzle of honey. For bannocks, mix oats with water, salt, and a bit of fat, then cook in a skillet. The result is a chewy, satisfying flatbread, perfect for breakfast or a hike. Modern oatmeal cookies or Scottish oatcakes carry the DNA of these medieval foods, proving simple ideas can last centuries. Legumes, peas, beans, lentils, were a cheap source of energy. Dried and easy to store, they could be cooked into stews or ground into flour for quick breads. Dried peas were especially popular, boiled whole or turned into a coarse flour for dumplings. Legumes provided protein when meat was scarce, making them essential for long campaigns. The downside? A camp full of bean-eating soldiers wasn't exactly a rose garden, but it beat starving. Make a legume dish by soaking dried peas or lentils and cooking them with onion, garlic, and herbs. It's simple, cheap, and keeps you full. Modern pea soups, baked beans, or even hummus are kin to these medieval foods. If you've ever scarfed down a bowl of chili on game night, you're not far from a soldier's cauldron, just with better spices and no siege risk. Foraging was a critical skill for medieval armies. Soldiers were sent to gather wild herbs, berries, or roots to stretch rations. Nettles, dandelions, and wild garlic were common finds, tossed into pottage or eaten raw in desperate times. Foraging wasn't just for grunts. Commanders relied on it to keep armies fed when supplies ran low. In extreme cases, soldiers ate bark or grass, but let's focus on the tastier stuff. Foraged foods added variety and nutrients, a lifeline in lean times. Today, foraging is trendy, especially among farm-to-table foodies. Pick some wild herbs like dandelion or purslane, check local laws and safety first, and boil them with garlic and olive oil for a medieval-style side. Modern nettle soups or wild herb salads echo these foraged meals, showing nature's pantry is still open. Pancakes, surprisingly, were a battlefield staple. Soldiers carried flour or ground grains, mixed with water or milk for a quick batter. Cooked on a hot stone or griddle, they were more like crepes or flatbreads than today's fluffy stacks. They were portable, could be stuffed with cheese, dried fruit, or fat, and were known as journey cakes in some regions, perfect for eating on the go. Make medieval pancakes by mixing flour, water, and salt, and cooking them in a skillet. Stuff them with jam or cheese for a modern twist. Modern crepes, blinis, or johnnycakes have roots in these simple campaign pancakes. If you've ever made pancakes while camping, you're channeling a medieval soldier spirit, just with better gear and no arrows flying. Sieges were a culinary nightmare. Trapped in a castle or walled city, soldiers and civilians had to make do with dwindling supplies. Stored grains were ground into flour for bread or porridge, while preserved meats and dried fruits were rationed carefully. Some castles had gardens for herbs or vegetables, but in long sieges, people got creative. Horse meat, rats, or even boiled leather turned into grim jelly. Let's stick to the less bleak options. Stored grains and legumes were the backbone of siege diets, cooked into sparse but nutritious meals. Recreate a siege meal with pantry staples. Boil barley with dried apples and a pinch of herbs, or bake a dense rye loaf to pair with jerky. Modern preppers stock similar foods, canned beans, dried fruit, grains, showing siege cuisine still has relevance. It's not gourmet, but it'll keep you alive during a blackout or hypothetical zombie apocalypse. When armies won battles or looted rich villages, they could eat like kings, relatively speaking. Fresh meat, stolen wine, or spices like cinnamon were rare luxuries. Officers always ate better, with fine cuts or imported delicacies, but even grunts could enjoy a decent meal after a successful raid. These feasts were a morale boost, a brief escape from the campaign grind. For a victory feast, roast pork with rosemary and garlic, serve it with pottage, and pair it with red wine or home-brewed beer. Add a pinch of cinnamon for a noble flair. Spices were a status symbol back then. Modern roasts or spiced wine carry the echo of these celebratory moments, when soldiers could eat like lords, if only for a night. Camp cooks were the unsung heroes of any army. Working with limited tools and questionable ingredients, they turned moldy grains and tough meat into something edible. Cooking over open fires with dented cauldrons wasn't easy, but a good cook could work miracles using herbs, salt, or fat to mask flaws. Some armies had mobile bakers and brewers, setting up ovens or vats in camp. These folks were as vital as the soldiers. A hungry army is a mutinous one. Try cooking like a camp cook with a cast iron pot over a fire or grill. Simmer a stew or bake flatbreads on a hot stone. Modern camping recipes, like foil packet meals or skillet bread, reflect this ingenuity. It's a fun way to connect with history, though you'll probably thank your modern kitchen afterward. Religion also shaped diets, even in war. The church imposed fasting days, banning meat on Fridays or during Lent. Armies had to turn to fish, legumes, or dairy, which wasn't always practical in war. Coastal armies might have barrels of salted herring, while inland ones relied on cheese or beans. These rules were often ignored under pressure, but they left a mark on military provisions. Try a fasting day meal with baked fish and a side of lentils. It's simple, satisfying, and keeps the church happy. Modern Mediterranean diets, with their focus on fish and legumes, reflect these traditions, showing how faith shaped food even in chaos. The Crusades brought new flavors to the table. European soldiers tasted rice, almonds, and spices like saffron in the Holy Land. These were rare delicacies, but some made it back to Europe, influencing local cuisines. Rice pottage became a favorite for its portability. Spices were prized loot, often worth more than the soldiers themselves. Make a Crusades-inspired dish with rice, almonds, and a pinch of saffron or cumin. It's a simple way to taste history. Modern dishes like paella or biryani owe something to these cultural exchanges, born from the clash and blend of cultures. Bread wasn't just food, it was a multi-tool. Soldiers used it as a trencher, an edible plate for piling pottage. When it got too hard, they broke it into pieces and soaked it in broth or beer to make it chewable. Some armies carried biscuit bread, like biscotti, dried until nearly indestructible. It was perfect for long campaigns, though you needed strong jaws or a lot of patience to eat it. To make biscuit bread, bake a rye or barley loaf, slice it thin, and bake it again until it's bone dry. It's like making your own hardtack, lasting months, ideal for survivalists or anyone wanting to feel like they're storming a castle. Modern biscotti or zwieback are distant cousins, though usually sweeter and less useful as projectiles. Pottage was a blank canvas. In a good week, it might include fresh vegetables or a bit of pork. In a bad one, it was just grain and water, maybe with nettles to pretend it was nutritious. Cooks got creative, adding wild garlic or mustard to hide the monotony. Some armies carried spice kits, pouches of salt, pepper, or ginger, for officers. The key was keeping it simple but scalable, so one pot could feed many. Experiment with pottage variations by switching up grains or vegetables. Try oats one day, barley the next, and add whatever's in your fridge. Carrots, celery, or spinach work well. For authenticity, skip the blender and keep it chunky. Modern stews like Irish coddle or French pot-au-feu share pottage's spirit of making do with what's on hand. Preserved meats were a science and an art. Salting pork meant rubbing it with coarse salt and letting it sit for weeks, sometimes with herbs like thyme or bay. Drying meat required hanging strips in the sun or over a fire, a slow process that produced jerky. Smoked sausages were trickier but treasured for their flavor and longevity. Soldiers often traded these meats for other goods, like a better spot by the fire or a swig of beer. Make your own jerky by marinating beef strips with salt and spices, then drying them in an oven or dehydrator. It's not quite the same as hanging meat over a smoky fire, but it's close. Modern sausages like salami or bresaola carry the legacy of these techniques, refined but rooted in the need to preserve food for tough times. Cheese making varied by region. In Northern Europe, hard cow's milk cheeses were common, aged until leather tough. In warmer climates, goat or sheep cheeses were typical, pressed into dense wheels. Soldiers carried them wrapped in waxed cloth or wooden boxes, slicing off chunks with their knives. Some cheeses were so pungent they could double as psychological weapons. Imagine the enemy fleeing the smell. Buy aged cheeses that mimic these qualities or try making a farmer's cheese with milk, vinegar, and salt. It's not as durable as medieval cheese, but it's a start. Modern cheeses like Manchego or aged cheddar capture the spirit of what soldiers ate, especially paired with a crusty loaf or a handful of dried fruit. Beer was more than a drink. It was a survival tool. Brewers used whatever grains were available, like barley or oats, and fermented with wild yeast or bread scraps. The result was a low-alcohol, slightly fizzy drink, safer than water and full of calories. Some armies carried small beer, even weaker, to stretch supplies. Brewers were quick, churning out beer in a day or two to keep the troops hydrated. Brewing a medieval-style beer at home is straightforward but takes patience. Use malted barley, water, and yeast, no hops, and add herbs like yarrow or heather for flavor. Modern microbreweries often experiment with these ancient recipes, so try a grut or historical beer if you don't want to brew your own. It's a piece of history with less risk of cholera. Dried fruits were the soldiers' dessert, though calling it dessert is generous. Apples, pears, and plums were sliced and sun-dried, while figs and dates were common in southern campaigns. During the Crusades, soldiers discovered preserved citrus, a tangy addition that helped prevent scurvy before anyone knew what vitamins were. Honey, when available, was used to candy fruit, a treat for officers. Stock up on dried fruits for a quick medieval snack, or soak them to add to a stew. Modern dried apricots or prunes work just as well, and trail mixes are a time machine to the 14th century. If you're feeling fancy, try candying fruit with honey. Medieval nobles would approve. Oats were a mainstay in the north, especially in rugged terrain where other crops struggled. Porridge was the go-to, but bannocks were the star for mobility. These flat cakes were cooked on griddles or in fire ashes, ideal for soldiers on the move. Some recipes added fat or milk, but the basic version was just oats and water, tough enough to survive a week in a pack. Bake bannocks in a skillet with oats, water, and salt. They're great for breakfast or a hike, with a texture between a biscuit and a pancake. Modern oatmeal cookies or Scottish oatcakes carry their legacy, showing that simple ideas endure. Legumes were a lifeline when meat was scarce. Dried peas were ground into flour for quick breads or boiled into thick soups. Lentils and beans were just as versatile, cooked whole or mashed. Some armies mixed legume flour with water and fried it into patties, a kind of medieval falafel. They were cheap, filling, and didn't spoil, perfect for long marches. Cook a pot of lentil or pea soup with garlic and herbs to taste the past. Hummus, baked beans, or modern falafel are their heirs. They're proof you don't need fancy ingredients for something satisfying. Just a fire and some patience. Foraging wasn't just a backup plan. It was a core strategy. Soldiers were trained to spot edible plants, from sorrel to wild mustard. In desperate times, they boiled roots or chewed berries, though some learned the hard way which ones were less edible and more, "You'll regret this." Foraged foods often meant the difference between a decent meal and starvation, especially during long campaigns or sieges. Try foraging in your area, with a guide or app to avoid poisoning yourself. Wild herbs like purslane or watercress can be sautéed or added to soups. Modern farm-to-table restaurants love these ingredients, but medieval soldiers were the original locavores, eating what the land offered. Pancakes were a quick fix for hunger. A simple batter of flour and water was cooked on a hot surface, producing a flexible flatbread. Sometimes stuffed with cheese, herbs, or fat, they were carried as rations in some regions, rehydrated with a soak in beer or broth. Make a batch of medieval pancakes with flour, water, and salt. Stuff them with something sweet or savory. Modern crepes, injera, or dosas share their simplicity, adapted across cultures and centuries. Sieges forced armies to get creative. Stored grains became porridge or flatbreads, and preserved foods were rationed to the last crumb. Some castles had dovecots or rabbit hutches for fresh meat. In extreme cases, they ate anything that wouldn't kill them, but grains and legumes kept most alive. Make a siege meal with barley, dried peas, and herbs. It's sparse but sustaining, like something you'd eat while waiting for the enemy to give up. Modern survival foods, canned soups, dried beans, follow this logic, ready for any crisis. Victory feasts were a rare luxury. After a won battle, soldiers might roast fresh game, crack open stolen wine, or even use spices like pepper or cloves. These feasts were a morale boost, though often just a fancier version of pottage. Officers, of course, got the best, venison with a side of smugness. Recreate a victory feast with roasted chicken, a vegetable stew, and a glass of wine. Add a pinch of nutmeg for a medieval vibe. Modern holiday roasts or hot ciders reflect these moments when war gave way to pleasure. Camp cooks were essential. With battered pots and dubious ingredients, they worked magic. Some roasted bones for broth or ground stale bread to thicken. Their improvisation was as crucial as any battle tactic. Cook a stew over a campfire with whatever's in your pantry. Carrots, lentils, a bit of bacon. Modern one-pot recipes, like gumbo, owe much to these cooks who fed many with little. Religious fasting days complicated things. Meat was banned on Fridays or during Lent, forcing reliance on fish, legumes, or dairy. Coastal armies might have salted herring, while inland ones used cheese or beans. These rules were often broken in war, but they shaped provisions. Cook fish with legumes for a fasting meal. It's simple and keeps the church happy. Modern Mediterranean dishes reflect these traditions, born from faith in wartime. The Crusades introduced exotic flavors. Rice and spices like cumin were new to Europeans. Rice pottage became popular for its portability. Spices were a treasure, often worth more than the soldiers. Make rice with spices and nuts for a Crusades-inspired dish. Dishes like pilaf or rice pudding have roots in these exchanges, born from war. These foods were more than fuel. They were resilience. Soldiers and cooks made miracles with what they had, creating practical, lasting dishes. That we still eat bread, pottage, and cheese shows their power. Recreate them without pillaging, and be glad you're not eating on a battlefield.